on architectural pedagogy and looking at the ecosystem of architectural pedagogy in the country. And we had several people, heads of schools and others who were here sharing several concerns in sort of thinking of architectural pedagogy. And some of the things that we also realize is that in some ways the profession as we understand it is also limited or in the way it addresses a very small fraction of the population. There are very specific ways in which we're understanding that it's not able to address concerns of social justice, and we extend it to kind of speaking of spatial justice. I think what we kind of miss is this engagement with spatial justice. And so in that sense, this panel is an important I would say intervention in that sense, that we are a that we're not only inviting architects, who are registered as people who are delivering architectural services, but these are spatial practitioners that we have on the table. So these are artists, architects, for people from various disciplines, and we'll hear that as we do an introduction. But also, I think another important aspect to who we've called here on this panel is that it's not only individual practitioners. And I think that is an important register today. In some ways, this whole we've built an entire tradition of the hero architect, this one single practitioner. And I think that the same thing goes for artists as well, right? Like this whole idea of the hero practice. But in contemporary times, it's almost redundant. You really cannot think of individual practices. And in some ways, these are collectives, groups that have come together with in different ways, through different kinds of solidarities. And I think that is an important dimension to also who we've invited to this table. So with that, and I think this is also there are a lot of people who will now. We had a graduation event yesterday, and there are a lot of people from the senior years. Some of these are also going to feed you after this. So in some ways, also for them to think of what does it mean to think of the coordinates of practice. Is it possible to even think of this individual practicing, or are there other modes of thinking? So I think some of these are some of the coordinates of the discussion. And I think what we'll begin with is a long introduction. So what we'll do is we'll go around the table, and if each of you because I think we don't have written bios, which is also I think important, because what we would like you to do is introduce yourselves, almost like a long introduction of what your work is. And I think to just kind of set up maybe three kind of parameters that we'll discuss, and of course we'll come back to kind of reminding, because we'll do 3 rounds. The first one we'll do is a long introduction of each of you, and if you want to show something and just kind of locate the coordinates of your practice. The second, I think, question would be important in terms of thinking of what does it mean to not work only as an individual practitioner? What is it that you bring to the practice working as a collective? So I think that's the second question that we would be interested in discussing. And I think the third question that we would be interested in discussing is, if that is the case, then what are the modalities of a practice like this? What are organizational structures? Do they have to change? Because so far we have a particular practice. There'll be a proprietary setup, there'll be employees working, and so that's kind of one way of thinking. But are there other modes of organizing oneself? Are there other structures through which you can think of these kind of setups? So I think these three kind of coordinates, and maybe we can start with the first one, which is this long introduction. So who wants to start?
I've only got one slide, so I'll just talk and then head down to this. Okay, so I'm Zameer. Uh, I'm partner at the Basrai Design Studio, and today I'm presenting Bandra Collective's work, which is this one slide. Uh, we are 6 studios that are kind of working together now. Um, and so I'll just list them down. So there's Alan from Abraham John Architects. There's Samir from Samir De Monte Architects. Samir Podora from Samir Podora and Associates. Proneet Nath from Urban Studio. And there's Robert and Shafali from Architecture Brio. And there's us. I work with my brother, Ayaz. Okay, so that's the group. I'll just give you a little bit of a background on how we started, and then I'll just talk you through what we did at Carter Road. Um, so we, I mean, straight out of school, we, the first important thing is to find your community. Graduate from SEPT, so you're looking for, some meaning in your work. Um, we kind of go out from where we had set up shop in Ranwar village, and we started meeting neighbors and just talking to them, figuring out if there's something to be done. And of course, we went in with the lens of kind of heritage and Ranwar village and all those kind of, and because we had background in measure drawing, interesting places. We went and measured through bunch of houses, bunch of monuments, uh, and then we just sat on it. So we didn't really know what to do. There was no real engagement post that. And then we realized that we could kind of raise some money, for upkeep. Maybe that's a way of kind of entering into the space. So we started making small doll houses of these measure drawings, and then we sold them. They were all kind of digitally fabricated, and there was like a little put together kit, and we actually managed to raise money. So we had monuments painted and little lighting, old bills that were not paid. We managed to pay all that stuff off. Um, and that was exciting because we like to do measure drawing, and they're getting money, and it's all win-win in that sense. As soon as we started hitting some of the heritage notes, high notes, that's when we were told to back off. Uh, and we learned our lessons in that way. Now, while we are doing all this, and we also engage with the Celebrate Bandra Festival and the Ranwar Festival and smaller things like that, while we are doing this, Samir De Monte is fixing the drainage in the same village. He was solving the stormwater problem, which is a perennial problem there. There's a lot of choking, old pipes. So he's doing that. He's also getting a little bit of recognition from the ward office, and he's doing his paving, kind of these cobblestone paving, and creating a little courtyard like space for the Ranwar festival to take place. He put up signage outside. Now then you realize that you're basically doing things in silos. We are doing our thing, he's doing his thing, and then when we start to map more villages like this, we realize that Samip is doing his thing. In Kantwadi, he's become the ALM, kind of the head, and he's trying to convince everyone to get things done. Uh, so actually, we met purely to map a larger terrain, and to come up with a water kind of conservation plan for Bandra. And we thought that the gardens were the key to it, so that if we would kind of map out the open spaces and make sure that we address the water issue in the open spaces as a network, we could actually uh, create a much more sustainable thought ahead. And also all our individual work would get realigned. So that was our first kind of meeting. And then at the same time, there was some amount of activism happening around the coastal road. So we pitched in there, and that was actually the two kind of poles which were, the projects that we were looking at together. So one was this kind of a Bandra mapping, and the other one was a little bit of creating the maps and visuals of what the coastal road is actually going to be like, because till then there were just maps, there were no visualizations. And of course that tanked completely, because we visualized and people used to go, wow, and we were like, this is not the reaction we're supposed to have, so it was actually that didn't really work out as good. Most things don't work out very well. So anyway, that is how we met. And now from there we actually took up, we did the Vikhroli street competition with the BMC, and then we won one of the streets there. And we started kind of working ahead. We did a little bit of a site marking, and then of course that project also tanked. But then now we're together, and we get an opportunity from PK Das, the architect, to kind of take up the work at the Carter Road Promenade. And then we actually, it's something that an individual studio can't really manage. It's too big. It's also kind of extremely time intensive. I mean, you're not going to be able to run a practice and do that. It's a full-time job. You need to be only doing that. So in that sense, 6 studios pooled in all resources. We were working out of Sameep's and Robert's office, because they were slightly bigger conference halls. So we got all our work done, and everything was, kind of working pro bono. And at that time, we also set up the not-for-profit called Bandra Collective. So it's not for profit by choice. It's also not making money. But anyway, so that's the background on Bandra Collective, and this is the Carter Road kind of the little map that we had kind of created. And we managed to carve out a few zones where we could create a little bit of seating space, and also work with there's one area where young folk do their a little bit more of an higher exercise, so they were swinging and rolling and all that. So that we've set up one park for that. There's a place for older people as well over there. Yeah, so that's the introduction. Good.
Hi, my name is Pratik. Me, Sahej, and Anjali, we run a collective studio space called Jaadughar in Borivali East. My background is art, design, and engineering. Anjali is, should I be talking for you guys? Okay. Anjali is a programmer. Sahej is also an artist. And our overlap essentially is we all grew up in the same building in Kandivali. So that's how we know each other. So we go back 20 something years. And I think that's very spatial and spatial. So that's interesting. But as a result of that, I think what happened was, because we had this kind of connection, we were able to then explore how to collaborate without relying on narrower kind of criteria for collaboration. As a result of that, we were able to come together in a more sort of abstract or, at a more philosophical level. Now, going back to Jaadughar, the way that we've been looking at our practices, and I want to talk about what you said with hero architects and hero artists, because that has sort of been this theme for the last year for us. We were really influenced by Ursula Le Guin and her essay, Carrier Bag Theory of Fiction, and how she talks about the hero narrative in fiction and in art and architecture. I think it follows the same thing. And what we wanted to explore was how to break out of that. How do we then think about these things in a broader way, in a way which encompasses complexity? So I wrote my graduate thesis on complex systems and complexity. So that was always kind of the thing for me in how do we do this without reductionism? How do we do this without simplifying something or charting just one path? Now, the way that our practices have evolved sort of with Anjali works for an organization called Mnemonic, which is a human rights and war crimes archiving organization based in Berlin. They are currently working on the Ukraine war archive and Syrian archive. Sahej's practice is, I think, pretty well known with fiction and sculpture and art and even technology. So the way we were thinking about this thing was, how do we speak about sort of not just political, but also what's ahead of that. Like, what are we doing about it? What are the alternatives that we are thinking about, and how to materialize that in some sense? So our first attempt at that was the show People's Freedom 75 that we organized last August in the Independence Day week. And this had a bunch of different activist groups involved in this. And it started off as just us, our studio, doing this show. But we wanted to think about, okay, if we're talking about people's movements and how a lot of progressive change, or most progressive change, has come as a result of people's movements and struggles, how do we then present that in a way that retains that complexity while keeping this hero narrative out, while actually trying to talk about, okay, what were the things that were happening on the ground, or what were the things that were happening, even if they're contradictory, but how to present this complex picture in a show. And what that became was this kind of really essentially a week-long mela in Bhupesh Gupta Bhavan in Prabhadevi. These are some pictures from that. Over 80 artists, performers ended up participating from all over the country. And we had 200 something works of art. Oh, sorry, my bad. I've seen all of this. So.
Acha, so the one thing that Pratik will never admit, okay? So this is where I have to step in and say this is how it started actually. The idea for the show, Pratik was invited singularly because his own practice has sort of been looking at the figure of the martyr, you know, and how the body of the martyrs then becomes an icon, a symbol to sort of foreground certain kind of narratives around the nation and, like, kind of rile up emotions, both on the left and the right. Right. So this was something that Pratik was approached for, and uh, what Pratik then decided to do was open this out. He said that, like, this conversation is something that a multitude should be having. If we are going to speak about what led to what are the sort of ideals and values that have kind of held forth the idea of democracy in India, then we need to have every possible voice speaking together in congregation, and that is essentially what People's Freedom had become. It was a 5-day festival that we installed in with over 140 works, like Pratik mentioned. 140 artists, and then the number of works of 80 artists. Sorry, and then there were more people coming in on, including there were. Yeah, like, artists from indigenous communities who are living in sorry in Bombay, people from the LGBT community, people differently able bodies, from the Bahujan community. And the idea here was also to kind of have voices that have been adversarial in a way across history to come together and speak, and kind of reassess the fundamental ideas that lie beneath, what we sort of imagine democracy to be. And that's kind of what played out. In fact, on the last day, so as you know, there's a protest that's going on right now in Bombay as well. And do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, a lot of people were involved in this, and we felt that towards the end, if we're talking about people's movements, people have been protesting in RA for a long time, and that itself is a very complex protest because of competing voices. Everyone will know about that here. So to invite some of the people from there to come and sort of take over the space on the last day and talk about, and they just came and played music and just really like activated the whole thing in a very interesting way. But what came of this was that a lot of new connections happened in people who are talking about these things. That was one thing. Secondly, it was a very, very reassuring kind of a thing because we didn't expect it to blow up like that. Not in terms of the audience, of course, but the artists themselves. It felt like people were just waiting to get a space, and they had things ready, and people like this was completely we had to fundraise for the entire show, and people really pitched in and sent works on their own money, and it really just was like it was overwhelming in the way that this happened, and that was so reassuring that everyone has something to say. They're waiting for this to happen. So I think largely the lesson from this for us was that how do we do this in a more sustained way, not just for a week, but how do we do this in a much more sustained way? So from there, coming to what we're doing now at Jaadughar is looking at this kind of a collaborative space where artists across Bombay, artists across India can come and do a lot of their engagement, like public facing things here. So already at the studio, we do a lot of like art, our own practices, but also education related things. Like we've done a course with C. A lot of you guys have come to the studio and worked there. And we want to sort of bring that in a larger format where, okay, how do we do this with 80 people instead of 3? And that's the direction that we're working on now, in trying to start a cooperative space which is much more lively. Like there should be 3 or 4 things happening all the time every day, and then in that kind of a space where everyone has a foothold in Bombay, that's how you can beat rent, you know. Like if the utilization is high, then the rent for per room or per space reduces drastically. You can bring it down to under like 600, 700, including staff, including utilities, which is amazing, right? And that's the thing that we are currently working on trying to establish. Um, Inviting artists, and not just artists, actually, engineers, architects, designers, journalists. Anjali is working on an investigative journalism project. So everyone from all kind of things who share a common idea for not just to, okay, being critical is really important, but what then? That is the important thing for us, and that the criticality needs to be uh, have an equal sort of creative side from there. So to do that together in a collaborative way, that's kind of what we're working on right now at Jadughar.
Just to so this is also how we kind of speak at Jadughar, where I try to sneak in the last word. No, but like kind of Pratik mentioned that we're friends from like really young, and then that idea of friendship is what this kind of solidarity has kind of come from as well. Like we literally have no filters with each other, and that's kind of allowed us to kind of build this in a certain way. And yeah, and that's kind of the kind of ethos of Jadughar as well, where it, you know I was going to say something really wrong, but no, yeah, that like that we can be really critical of each other, and then put that on, use that energy into kind of building really expansive spaces. There's a kind of radical optimism that's at play over here, that kind of is able to kind of contend with really strange sort of odds, not just on a financial level, but like, uh, and what's beautiful is like, that this is all kind of like been possible mostly because of the humor and the kind of like, that we've kind of built this place with, like, and yeah, so like, friendship literally leading to solidarity is how we came together. Dosti Zindabad, which has been like, also, uh, uh, do you want to talk about? Okay. Uh, it's been the Nara of people's freedom, like, yeah, anyway. Uh,
Um, am a programmer. I don't usually get mics to talk on, so it's not my, it's definitely not my thing. Like Pratik said, I'm working on, I work with a lot of investigators and researchers at the moment. My daytime job is doing tech for a data archiving NGO. And yeah, that's mostly it. Jaadughar has, I don't know, I think you did a good job, Pratik.
Thanks, guys. Hi, this is Bhawna. Yeah, but we'll talk. This is Sandhya. Both of us worked together at the community design agency since 2018. And I first met Sandhya in 2016. She was just back in India after spending like some 10 years overseas. She worked with Architecture for Humanity. And at that time, I was working with the Hunarshala Foundation in Bhuj. And I think we both bonded over our deep disdain of architectural fraternity. That's so I mean, disdain is a strong word, and maybe Sandhya would not use that word, but since she asked me to talk, so yeah. Yeah. And that was also because I found like I only practiced architecture, like it is mostly practiced for 6 months during my internship, and I found the whole process, and I don't have an English word for it, but in Hindi it's called niras. It was just, I feel, so detached from the world outside, from the culture, from the politics, the sociology, and I just felt, oh my God, like this cannot be my life. I want to, I'm a people's person. I want to go out. I want to, and also, I mean, social cultural is like another thing, but on a personal level, the hierarchies which are in practices, you have this architect who sits in like a corner glass, whatever. And then, then the junior architects will sit closer, and then the interns will, all of that like just really, really bothered me. I was so bothered by the hierarchies. And I felt that if I mean, if you stay in such a practice, and if you're so part of the hierarchies yourself, how are you going to challenge hierarchies outside in the society? So and because we can all talk about spatial justice, social justice, but ultimately like it all comes down to how you operate. And that's why when Sandhya was setting up community design agency in Bombay that time, I was looking to make a move. I had already spent 5 years chasing camels and goats and doing all sorts of work, and now I was ready for the city life, and I jumped at the offer because it's somewhere we were both, I think we had the same mission, where we were thinking of she wanted to create a practice which is looking at it, which is very people oriented, communities oriented, and to start. And how do we, and I think the biggest part of community design agency has been learning from different communities and adapting that into our practice. This was one of our first projects. Do you want to talk about it? So this is the previous project is a house for sex workers in Shevgaon. This was built in 2018, and this was one of the first projects we did. Now, so the ground floor of the project, the ground floor is used by a sex worker for working, and the top floor is where they run community literacy classes with the entire community. And this was designed with them. Then we have been extensively working in Natvarpare colony in Govandi. And when we started the project, when, Sandhya walked in 2016 and I joined in 2018, we knew there were a lot of structural inadequacies. And as architects, you look at badly designed building and what the first thing you want to do, how can we spatially design it? And I feel like we really work towards not acting with that urgency that we were taught in architecture school, that okay, do not look at it as a design problem. It's not a design problem. It's a social problem. It's a cultural problem, and so we've been working. It's a 25,000 strong community. We have done multiple projects there, looking at reclaiming streets. We started a library there. We've done a number of art initiatives, and now we are doing the first Go on the Arts Festival there, for which all of you are invited. It starts next week from 15th Feb, and it's going to go on till 19th February. Next. This is Sanjay Nagar. This is in Ahmednagar. This is a slum redevelopment project where we've been working since 2016, right? 2017, and the first phase of the project is complete. Now we are in the process of raising funds to do the other phases of the project. But yeah, so I feel like in the last 5 years now we are like we've grown to a 12 number team, and now we're back to like a 6 member team, and I feel like we're still finding our way. We're still figuring it out. Where do we come, because we're not a traditional architecture practice, but we're also not a traditional activist practice, and I feel somewhere it's both our strength and weakness, because there's space for everyone. There's space for activism, there is space for art, there's space for design, like this. There's and yeah, that is why I've lasted here also so long.
Hi, thanks, Bhawna. So for me personally, outside of sort of um, the ideas of architectural practice and the way I kind of, my first internship was in 2006. And I worked in a very, very traditional architectural practice. And just like Bhavna was sharing, it really bothered me, that sort of the hierarchy, the very strict hierarchy that existed within the practice. And at the time, I just didn't really know how to articulate it and what was really bothering me about it. And then I went off to do my master's course, and at the time, it felt it was very unfortunate. I graduated in 2008, but I'm very grateful for it, because it then took me to Architecture for Humanity, which is a humanitarian um, practice. So it's basically a nonprofit around design, and that was in 2008. And that's when I kind of saw the power of design, but not design for the sake of design, but all the complexities that come with it. And my real experience was working in Haiti after the earthquake. And just sort of, and what really sort of fascinated me, again, having been to a really, again, traditional architectural school like Columbia University, where it's really all about the design and sort of the pedagogy around it, was that I still remember very vividly, we were driving from our staff housing to our offices, and it was sort of I think it was about 4 months after the earthquake. And there were kids getting out of the transit camp and walking to school, and they were in very well pressed uniforms, right? And then just really